Though the last of the Magnificent Seven of Universal Studios' classic monsters, so late that many don't even consider him to rightly be one of the monsters at all, I can tell you authoritatively that the creature from the Black Lagoon is by far the most popular of the bunch. I own a small shop where I sell monster and horror themed collectibles, decor, and accessories, and I literally can't keep the creature in stock. Invisible Man, Wolfman, King Kong, they'll stay for months and months. But Godzilla and the creature from the Black Lagoon fly off the shelves. Why is that? What makes the creature from the Black Lagoon so popular? Well, the first answer is the most obvious. He's cool. The creature is by far one of the best monster designs in all of movie history. There is no shortage of interesting, bizarre, inventive, and terrible monster designs in the canon of 1950s sci fi films. From the robot monster, to the blob, to Gort, to Robbie the robot, to the fly, to Godzilla. Few of them became truly iconic, and the creature is one of those iconic designs. It's an excellent design, perfectly executed, with just the right hybridization of man and fish. As we've seen in countless stabs at a creature like design, it's an easy monster to overdo, which is not to say that other Fishman designs aren't good in their own ways, but they inevitably seem to devolve into making something too monstrous, too inhuman. That can work in its own context, but to make the creature too monstrous would work against what makes his story so compelling. So, first, the creature is a visually compelling monster, who, alongside the Fly, the Blob, and Godzilla, is one of the best of its era. Next, the creature is a dramatically compelling character in his own right. The creature is the clearest example of the monster as the victim. It's cliche to say by this point, decades and decades on, but much of the appeal of the classic monsters is that so many of them are so sympathetic. We feel sympathy for the plight of the Frankenstein monster, resurrected into a life not of his asking, into a world in which he is reviled and tormented. It quickly makes us forget that the Frankenstein monster is a murderer all on his own, who does indeed have a fiendish intellect. The story of Frankenstein is ripe with the tensions between nature and nurture. Or poor Larry Talbot, tormented by his inner darkness that manifests outwardly as a literal werewolf. Or Imhotep, whose doomed love transcends the millennia. Or Eric the Phantom of the Opera, cursed by horrific ugliness and twisted into something obsessive and evil. The creature from the Black Lagoon is the most unambiguously innocent monster. He has no particularly malevolent will. He is merely a prehistoric creature defending himself from humankind. Not since Quasimodo, Gwynplaine, or King Kong 20 or 30 years before had there been so clear and obvious an example of society being the real monster. In the first film, we come into his home and torment him. In the second, we take him from his home and hold him captive. And in the third film, we surgically mutilate him. If there's any film where I am 100% on the side of the monster, it is The Creature Walks Among Us. Then there is the era that the creature comes from. Whereas the other Universal monsters are products of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, the creature is a product of the 50s. The hip, mid century era of drive ins, jukeboxes, poodle skirts, Letterman jackets, and hot rods. The film was originally released in 3D, and while Universal has a modern 3D option on the current Blu ray disc, there is nothing quite like seeing it in true, retro, red blue 3D with your cheap cardboard glasses. Part of what makes the creature cool is that he is inextricably bound up in the coolness of the mid century milieu. It's so intractable that this is even what the celebrated Creature from the Black Lagoon pinball machine is themed to. It's not the creature exactly, it's going to the drive in to watch the creature in eye popping 3D. Yet, Creature from the Black Lagoon isn't the only Universal film from the era. The Universal International era of sci fi movies is replete with plenty of monsters that weren't folded into the main line of the Universal monsters. The Metaluna mutant of This Island Earth is often on the B team, but nary does the Deadly Mantis, Tarantula, Monster on Campus, or the Monolith monsters get a mention. That's because, at the end of the day, Creature from the Black Lagoon is, plain and simply, a great film. The movie begins as a competent scientific mystery, as an expedition finds the remains of some fossil creature that might not merely be an artifact of the past. But as the expedition penetrates deeper into the Black Lagoon, it turns into a consummate survival horror. There is something lurking out there, in the water, in the depths, picking off the expedition one by one. Even though most of the action takes place in daylight, the creature is hidden beneath the water's surface, within the weeds of the lagoon's bottom, and behind the towering mossy trees that fringe it. You never know where or when the creature is going to strike. Even our first time seeing its full body is a throwaway jump scare. And yet, some of the film's most effective scenes are when you don't see the creature. When you only see the net being dragged by something that was right behind the scuba diver, or the boat being rocked to and fro. That all alone taps into our primal fears of the water. Our element is the land. Water is a mystery, and where there is mystery, there is danger. We're not adapted for survival in it, and we don't like what might be lurking beneath there, hunting us. The water reorients humankind from the king of creation to a floundering prey animal. Now you take that primal fear of the water, and you bury it deep, deep within the unexplored, trackless depths of the Amazon, in places unknown and unmapped, where we literally have no idea what is lurking down there. All of this makes Creature from the Black Lagoon a supremely effective classic horror film. And yet, it isn't a classic horror film. Not in the same sense as Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman. Creature is also a consummate 1950s science fiction film. This is why some fans say, with an asterisk, that Creature isn't really one of the Universal monsters, because it isn't a classic gothic horror. Rather than darkened castles and superstitious villagers, it begins with the creation of the Earth itself from the primordial chaos of space, with lofty and scientific sounding narration about the powers of evolution. This time, our ostensible heroes are square jawed 1950s scientists, not the mad scientists of decades past like Dr. Griffin and Dr. Frankenstein. I mean, our sympathies lie with the creature, but we are meant to understand the scientists as more or less good people, bravely, if foolhardily, penetrating into secrets they were not meant to. The creature is a victim of them, but they are also victims of the creature. The closest thing to a villain is the one blonde scientist and director of the Institute who seems to vacillate between staying or going, capturing the creature or escaping, depending on whatever the plot needs him to be against at that moment. We're accustomed to mad chemists and mad biologists, not so much to mad ichthyologists and mad paleontologists. The scientists in this series don't start turning truly mad until the third film. In Creature from the Black Lagoon, the first one, they are mainly just scientists whose reach exceeded their grasp. They plunged headlong into the romance and adventure of scientific discovery without fully understanding what they were going to discover: the primal force and power of the Earth itself. Something, somehow, embodying all of evolution in a single body: fish, amphibian, reptile, and human. As Nestor Paiva's Captain Lucas says, maybe this creature is something more than merely an animal. Maybe it is some kind of primal force that is stronger than evolution. These scientists delved into things man was not meant to know, not from what they created, but from what they discovered. So what do they do in the second film but go back? The scientists of Creature from the Black Lagoon narrowly escaped with their lives, so the scientists of Revenge of the Creature are happy to step in, go back to Lagoon, capture the creature, and bring him back to civilization. This mysterious, primordial thing man was not meant to know, this force more powerful than evolution, becomes an ichthyological attraction at Florida's Marineland, standing in for the fictional Ocean Harbor Oceanarium. This is as close as we get to the test tube laboratory of the typical 50s science hero. The original 1938 streamlined modern curves of Marineland's original, long since demolished aquariums. Though critics of the time lambasted the film as dead weight on the original, I think it serves as a rather logical and poetical counterpoint to it. We go into the creature's world, then we bring the creature into our world. In the process, our sympathies for the creature rise as he becomes our innocent prisoner. Then comes the third film, which I would agree is the weakest of the bunch, despite having, perhaps, the most charismatic cast in Rex Reason and Jeff Morrow, reunited from 1955's This Island Earth. But it's good that they're there, because the story of the creature is really the B plot of this movie. Scientists track down the creature escaped from the oceanarium in the previous movie. It gets injured in a fire, which exposes its skin underneath its scales. This gives the mad scientist the idea to completely strip off the creature's scales and gills, turning it into, well, the idea is a creature that is even more like something human. Really, it's just a creature that's been mutilated and tortured. In the process, he starts acting philosophically, staring at the sea and demonstrating comprehension of the behavior of the humans around him. That behavior is the actual A plot of the film, which is a love triangle involving the jealous scientist played by Morrow and his abusive control over his wife. While this film could have had some more interesting things going on, and we get a bit of the idea that human society is more savage than the jungle, it really feels like it's relying on the human story because it had nothing more to really say about the creature after the first two films. Like most Universal films, the early films are classics, while the later films tend to be more of a niche interest. So, in that respect, if in few others, Creature from the Black Lagoon is indeed one of the great Universal monsters. None of which is to say that the creature doesn't fit, of course. Though representative of a very different era in horror and science fiction than Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman, it would be impossible to imagine the Universal monsters without him out there, lurking in the shadows of darkened swamps, in the unknown and unseen, representing the savage and primordial forces of evolution, a monster from our ancient ancestral past, made real in the present day.